So, the first thing I want to talk about today, something I've been very excited to talk about for a few episodes now. I've kind of been thinking about this and thinking if I was going to do a take on it, and I decided I wanted to talk about it. So, I'm going to talk about the most underrated running back in the NFL, James White. He's played football for life. He started out at St. Thomas Aquinas High School in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He played football with the Raiders and even went down as a member of the 2008 St. Thomas Aquinas National Championship team. Now, while at Aquinas, he split time with the running back position with Giovanni Bernard, who is the current day running back for the Cincinnati Bengals. White finished his tenure with St. Thomas Aquinas as the 70th ranked running back in his class, as well as being ranked as a 3-star recruit. Now, James White initially turned down offers from colleges like Clemson, Michigan State, and South Florida before he eventually ended up playing football at Wisconsin and was drafted by the Patriots in the 4th round of the 2014 draft. At Wisconsin, he averaged about 1,000 yards and 12 touchdowns each season, so pretty productive. And in total, he played for 4 years and hauled in 4,015 rushing yards and 45 rushing touchdowns. He also ended his college career with over 600 total receiving yards and 3 receiving touchdowns. Now, ironically, his NFL career has been defined up to this point not by his rushing ability, but by his receiving ability, something that was only severely showcased in his senior college season, in which he racked up over 300 receiving yards along with over 1,000 rushing yards. James White is currently the backup running back for the New England Patriots, but in his rookie year, he only played in 3 games. He totaled just 3 carries for 21 yards and 3 catches for 15 yards, something you can kind of expect from a 4th-round pick. A bad first season, as he was also inactive for the Patriots' Super Bowl win against the Seahawks that year, although he still had time. In his second NFL season, White began to turn his professional career in the right direction. In Week 13, White caught a career-high 10 passes for 115 yards and a touchdown in a 35-28 loss to the Philadelphia Eagles. He would finish off the season with a total of 40 receptions for 410 yards and 4 touchdowns, along with a meager 22 carries for 56 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. In White's third season, 2016, he broke out, and his name began to truly spread throughout the NFL. He finished the 2016 season with 60 catches for 551 receiving yards and 5 receiving touchdowns, to go along with 39 carries for 166 rushing yards. What would define the beginning of his NFL spotlight, though, would be Super Bowl 51 against the Atlanta Falcons. In this, James White ended up breaking several records and making a strong case for the Super Bowl MVP award. Now, the Super Bowl MVP award would ultimately end up in the hands of Brady, who would set the new record for passing yards in a Super Bowl, despite breaking that very record 2 years later against the Eagles with over 500 yards. White finished Super Bowl 51 with 20 total points off of 3 total touchdowns and a 2-point conversion. This was the first of many records that White would set that day. White also cashed in the final blow in overtime against the Falcons to put the Patriots up 34-28, ultimately completing their impossible 25-point second-half comeback. And during the game, White had 139 yards from scrimmage, 29 rushing and 110 receiving, becoming only the second running back in NFL history with over 100 yards in a Super Bowl. He also managed to break Demaryius Thomas's reception record from the Super Bowl prior with 14 total catches. After the game, several analysts and even Brady were confused as to why White did not receive the MVP award, but it was ultimately defined by who was seen as the Patriots' leader, Tom Brady. A year later, James White would put up similar regular season numbers with 171 rushing yards and 429 receiving yards. He would continue his postseason excellence, though, scoring both a rushing touchdown and a receiving touchdown in the Patriots' divisional matchup against the Titans, and in the Patriots' conference championship, White would end up with a touchdown as well. The Patriots would ultimately lose the Super Bowl to the Eagles, but White would also finish that game with over 70 scrimmage yards and a touchdown. In the 2018 season, James White was named a team captain for the first time in his career. This translated to career highs in rushing yards, touchdowns, receptions, and receiving yards. White totaled up 425 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns, 87 catches, 751 receiving yards, and 7 receiving touchdowns. In total, he had over 1,100 scrimmage yards and 12 touchdowns. He would also tie another postseason record that season, tying the all-time single-game playoff receptions record with 15. White ultimately had another productive postseason, but was oddly and almost completely pushed out of the Patriots' offense in Super Bowl 53 with only 9 total yards. In 2019, the Patriots would ultimately suffer from a lackluster offense all year, but James White would still hold productive numbers, with 263 rushing yards and 645 touchdowns, totaling over 900 yards and 6 touchdowns. But this past season, along with Super Bowl 53, has brought an interesting and at times confusing narrative to go along with his career. Oddly, Sony Michel, the Patriots' current starting running back, has seemed to overshadow White's rushing ability in this past season, most surprising due to his 2018 career high in both rushing and receiving. In 2019, Michel averaged 3.7 yards per carry. James White averaged 3.9. James White led the Patriots in rushing attempts one time last season, in which he had 14 carries for 79 yards, along with 8 catches for 98 yards and 2 touchdowns in a 28-22 loss to the Texans. In this game, James White averaged 5.64 yards a carry. Sony Michel only broke 5 yards per attempt once that season against the Washington Redskins with 5.69 yards per attempt. In fact, James White also beat out Sony Michel's season total in yards per attempt by nearly half a yard. James White had 3.93 yards per attempt, while Sony Michel only had 3.69. So the confusing part comes when time and time again the Patriots chose Sony Michel over James White to lead the run game, when it was clear that James White could quite possibly put up much better numbers than Sony Michel had. Not only this, but by only primarily using Sony Michel in run sets and James White in passing sets, opposing defenses could often choose their defensive set based on which Patriot running back was on the field. Passing set for James White, and a rushing set for Michel. And overall, despite the Patriots seeing James White's dominant 2018 season, they didn't improve their utilization of him at all. In 2019, White was targeted 28 times less, to 95 targets from 123 the year before. Interestingly though, even with this, James White actually improved in terms of how many targets he caught, as well as improving his yard per catch average from 8.6 to 9.0. And despite catching 18% less passes than the year before, he only decreased 14% in yards. And honestly, I think 2019 was a case of Josh McDaniels and Bill Belichick wanting too badly for Sony Michel to be successful. Instead of going with what worked, the Patriots constantly and brainlessly threw Sony Michel up the middle for less than 3 yards over and over and over again. It was confusing to watch, as when the Patriots went James White's direction, they often got first downs and successful plays. But even then, they rarely increased how often they used James White. Now, some people may cut to the argument of, maybe James White is so successful because he's never been the Patriots' first option. Maybe that's why his averages in terms of per reception and per rush are so good. But that's the thing. What if the Patriots used him like the Panthers used Christian McCaffrey? If the Patriots ran first with White and passed first with him, wouldn't that be even more confusing for defenses? It would eliminate the identification of Sony Michel rarely catching passes and White rarely running the ball out of a pistol formation in the rare occasion that he is even put into a formation with the quarterback under center. As James White, if he both ran and passed the ball first, the defense wouldn't know what was coming even if James White was on the field, when now they can basically assume that when James White is on the field, it's a passing play. On top of this, James White's clock is ticking. At the very least, they could change up the playbook to give James White more of a rushing spotlight, at least to give him another chance to show himself off. And at the ripe age of 27, James White does not have a lot of time to be used the way he should be. Although White has shown a bit of durability, so I'm not too afraid of that. He's only missed games due to injury once, in which he was injured in mid-December of the 2017 season, eventually returning for the postseason. So overall, all in all, James White is in my eyes the most underrated running back in the National Football League. The Patriots don't have a lot of time left with him either, and should give him a chance to be used more like the Panthers used Christian McCaffrey. Bring him back to the 2018 season when he had over 1,100 yards and 12 touchdowns. Allow White to run almost as much as he pass catches.